Well, dear friends of the Schiller Institute, when we designed the title of this conference, and I hope I'm not mistaken because you gave a different name, I had the title of Whether the United States, Nuclear War or New Silk Road. Now, we did not have exactly an inkling at that time that the seed of both options would be condensed in the 2-day summit between President Trump and President Xi Jinping in Florida just a little while ago. But the first day of this summit was very positive. It was reported that the chemistry between the two presidents was very good. President Trump called it an outstanding relationship and, quote, lots of possibilities to get rid of potentially bad problems and hoping that they will go away. President Xi Jinping, on his part, said that he received a very warm reception, that they had an in-depth communication, and he stressed the unique importance of the US-Sino relationship. And, which is very important, he offered to the United States to join the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road. And as many of you may know, that I had called earlier that we must have a nationwide mobilization in the entire United States, that the United States must join with this fantastic new project. Now, obviously, what happened is not yet totally clear. Trump did not say anything explicitly. He didn't take up the offer. But if he does, and when I said this a little while ago, people were actually quite shocked to hear me say that. And I still say that, despite the fact what happened in the recent days, that if we can convince President Trump to take up the offer to join with China and the other nations in the New Silk Road, he can become one of the greatest presidents of the history of the United States. Now, in light of what happened with the airstrikes against Syria, many people may wonder why I'm still saying this, but I'm absolutely convinced of it, because if we can get the United States to join and cooperate, and later I will elaborate what that will mean, it would mean to overcome geopolitics, which has been the source of 2 world wars in the last century, because the United States would join what President Xi Jinping all the time calls a community for the shared future of mankind. And it would indeed begin a new era of mankind and eliminate the danger of nuclear war.
And thank you so much, Madame Helga Ziebler-Rouch, for your very interesting and very important speech, which really inspired us all. And as I understand that this morning, I'm invited to share with you what kind of meanings and characteristics do the Belt and Road Initiative carry, and can it bring it to relevant regions and to other parts of the world. So perhaps these are the main topics which I'm going to share with you this morning. At the opening plenary session of the 2017 annual meeting of the World Economic Forum held at Davos this January, Chinese President Xi Jinping pointed out that we shall firmly promote an open world economy to share opportunities and profits with other countries in the process of opening up, and to realize mutual benefits and a win-win situation. We shall not retreat to harbor whenever there is wind and waves. Otherwise, we will never be able to enter the paradise of success shared by all. China and the United States are the world's largest developing country and the world's most developed country in the world. So the relationship between the world's largest country and the world's most developed country is perhaps the most important and most dynamic relationship in the world. So I can talk on and on the specific statistics about our two countries in all aspects of life. However, the development and improvement of Sino-US relations cannot do without the high-level talks. As Madame LaRouche already mentioned in great details about the results of the meetings between the two heads of state last week, and I want to conclude my speech by talking about the results of the meetings between President Xi Jinping and also President Donald Trump. The meeting affirms the development, direction, and principles of China-US relations. Both leaders highly applauded the historic progress of Sino-US relations and agreed to promote greater development to a new starting point so as to bring more benefits to people of both countries and the entire world. President Xi reiterated the cooperation is the only choice for China and the United States, that both countries are capable of becoming good partners. He pointed out in particular that we have 1,000 reasons to make China-US relations a success and no reason to make bilateral relations a failure. President Donald Trump noted that the United States stands ready to cooperate with China to eliminate those factors and problems affecting bilateral relations, which will realize and bring about greater development of China-US relations.
I am so distressed by our recent missile attacks on Syria. I have defied anyone to give me a motive for Syria to have used a poison gas attack. And I've actually, I think to some extent, the White House has felt a bit defensive about this because they have found it necessary to go on the media and to refute my challenges. At the same time that we have this very brutal war, it was not a natural uprising in Syria, it was a coming together in a deliberate attempt by covert agencies to topple the government of Syria. We had toppled the government of Libya, and now we see a very, very brutal war in Yemen in which the Saudi Arabians are attempting to force a puppet government on the legitimate government in the capital city of Sana'a. All of this is so unnecessary. There's such vast slaughter and bloodshed, such tremendous destruction of property, factories, homes, and priceless architects or priceless artifacts that can never possibly be replaced. This time of destruction, bloodshed, hatred among peoples needs to come to an end.
Well, at the outset, I would like to thank the Schiller Institute for inviting the China Energy Fund Committee to be the co-organizer of this event. The Belt and Road Initiative operates according to the geoeconomic principles of win-win cooperation and overcomes the zero-sum game of geopolitical confrontation that threatens to bring the world close to war. The Belt and Road brings peace and justice by reducing inequalities. It has the potential to help the world to get rid of its current political, economic, and developmental crisis. The Belt and Road Initiative is a global challenge calling for global participation. Through this initiative, China is sending out the most sincere message, loud and clear, of collaboration and partnership to all our friends and foes from near and afar, to work together to find solutions for sustainable growth for all of humanity. In sharing, we become better partners in advancing our respective goals, and achieving our common dreams.
Sir, among us, we are people who organize for a very specific vision of the world, and you've referenced it. And obviously, Your nation has not been able to directly talk to the American people. You've talked at the United Nations, you're talking to diplomats and others. But here there's a cross-section of the American people. There are people here from many different parts of the country. And since you have an opportunity, I'd just like to ask you if you were able to talk to, in part here you're seeing a representation of the American people, and deliver a message to them as to what you think they should know about Russia and what you think they should be confident in, shall we say, about the intent of Russia toward the American people. What would you say?
Thank you. Mic is on. Thank you for this very difficult question, but I would say that we should not be afraid of each other. We should talk to each other. It's very important, and yesterday's negotiations of Secretary of State Tillerson in Moscow, both with Minister Lavrov and President Putin, proved that two major powers, two most powerful nuclear states, gain more than we are talking, but not than we are reacting and trying to build alliances and counter-alliances against each other. Russian policy was very clear from the very beginning. We don't want any special status in the world arena. We want equal treatment, fair treatment, not only for Russia, but for all other states. And if we can provide this fair treatment in all spheres, equal security, equal economic cooperation, equal exchanges between people, we are all going to gain a lot instead of trying to build new walls, trying to build new divides, trying to rebuild or strengthen those military alliances that exist. I don't know if I answered your question, but I will be more than happy to develop if there are more others. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
If we look overall at the value of infrastructure is what I want to focus on today, because there's aspects of infrastructure that make it different from anything else in the economy, and wrong economic thinking about it prevents financing and prevents it from being built and holds us back from reaping all of the benefits that we could from investments in these sorts of projects. If we look at the human species as a whole, what characterizes us is the fact that over historical time, we have become a new species repeatedly. If we were looked at from the standpoint of biology, you would say that the human species has been supplanted and transformed into a new species, a new genus, a new family, many times in our history. We've seen this in the changing relationship that we have to our environment. So we've seen it in the changing number of people that can exist on the planet. This is a chart of human population over the past 10,000 years. No animal species willfully changes the number of its species that can live on the planet. We do that. How do we do that? We do it in what makes us human, which if we look back to the Greek creation story of the human species, to the story of Prometheus, we're told a tale of how the human species was created. That before Prometheus, we had bodies that were human, but we didn't have minds. We didn't use fire. Prometheus, in giving fire to mankind, and number, and poetry, and astronomy, and the calendar, and all of the arts, and metallurgy, and medicine, and sailing ships, and the use of animals, by giving knowledge to mankind, we became a new species on this planet.
So I think one of the most important points that we want to focus on as part of this whole process is that it's not any one stage of human development that defines mankind. It's not a particular level of culture. It's not a particular level of technology. It's not a particular level of science. Not any particular infrastructure platform. It's the ability to always transcend to successively higher, qualitatively higher levels of existence. We see the World Land Bridge as a part of that step, kind of completing the ability of mankind to develop the continental regions as a whole. But we see this as just another step in an ongoing process. And I think it's pretty clear that the next steps beyond this are going into space and developing a real platform of human economic activity in the Earth-Moon system. And going beyond just visiting locations, exploring locations in space, but actually beginning real human economic development of the solar system, starting with the moon, looking towards Mars, and developing the kinds of infrastructure and technologies that can support this and make space travel as accessible, as regular as what we now think of as common everyday activities. So things like fusion propulsion. You're taking the travel time to Mars from something like 6 or 8 months down to a couple weeks, maybe a couple days, right? Things like advanced technologies for access to space. Space planes that can take off from a runway and take you into orbit, bypassing all the needs of rocket systems, space planes you could use over and over again. Or things like vacuum tube maglev launch into space could drop the cost of putting tonnage into orbit 500-fold. It costs 1/500th the cost of current expense. And the development of resources on other planetary bodies, getting beyond the need to take everything with us for exploration. Things like mining helium-3 on the moon, which is probably the best fusion fuel known to man at this point. Developing basic bases and infrastructure on the moon and other planetary bodies. So these define some broad categories that I think should, coming out of what we're discussing with the Silk Road, we should also be thinking about the future next steps, where we can transform mankind's relation to space in the same way we've transformed mankind's relation to the interior regions of continents, to other regions of the planet Earth, and recognize that it's only this process of continual successive development, where every generation is engaged in new revolutionary challenges, that we can really be adequately satisfied with our human existence.
This is connecting the Bering Strait, joining the Americas to the Belt and Road Initiative in Asia. This is a concept that really began a number of years ago. When I first joined the LaRouche organization back in 1991, we began talking about this concept, and I think we've pushed forward on that, and of course that has led us to where we are today. In the next slide, please. Helga, I'm very glad to have you here. Guten Tag. and it's very good to have you here back in the United States. The last time we saw each other, we were in Germany, and I'm very glad that the LaRouche movement and Helga and Lynn in particular have pushed so much for so long to really be thinking about and beginning the implementation of the Eurasian Land Bridge, and we're so thankful that China and the other countries in Eurasia have jumped on board on this to make it a reality, which it is certainly in the process of happening now. And the Eurasian Land Bridge, the early report in 1997, in which we presented the map of the network. Could I see the next slide, please? This is Eurasia. There is certainly a dotted line going to the Bering Strait from Yakutsk, and actually the line from Skоворodino to Yakutsk is now basically a solid line. And there is an extensive network in Eurasia now to implement a very extensive transportation which provides for economic growth and development, and it is something that has to be extended to North and South America. This is the World Land Bridge concept in implementation based on the Eurasian Land Bridge, and notice it is now connecting, or would connect, all of the world's continents. In the United States, We have to connect Alaska with Canada, with the West Coast corridor. We need to connect back to the Midwest and to the eastern United States, where the majority of the population and economic activity is, but we certainly do need the West Coast corridor. And there are two major infrastructure projects that need to be done. One, of course, is the tunnel, and the second is the Fraser River Canyon east of Vancouver between Hope and Kamloops, British Columbia. And then, of course, there's a third in going down to between Central and South America at the Darien Gap in southern Panama and northwestern Colombia.
The LaRouche movement has published numerous documents relating to the World Land Bridge, in which this concept is actually presented in a way that really provides the pathway to bring it to reality, and their leadership, and with Lynn and Helga in particular leading the charge on this, this is gradually becoming a reality, and of course the very critical support of the government in China and the neighboring countries, which needs to be extended through Russia to the United States, is very important, with the Bering Strait as the critical landmass between Europe and Asia, so that the world becomes Pacific-centered with development rather than Atlantic-centered, which is based on stagnation, as we're seeing because of the London-New York axis, which unfortunately still has too much influence in the United States.
The actual infrastructure and information flow and the movement of goods, services, people, and transborder crossings that the Silk Road Belt will achieve. This is a historic project, as you all know. It is probably the biggest global achievement, which is analogous to reaching out into space and to the moon and to other planets. It's probably the most comprehensive initiative that many nations will be working together on.
Okay, I would like to give you some information about the transportation systems, the history and the development. The more exciting is high-speed railway systems. The technology is very complicated. After recent 10 years quickly development, the China can construct high-speed railways in very complicated geologic and climatic areas. Let's take a look. We have a series of world-class railway projects. For example, in mountains, we constructed 4 tunnels very close. For example, the short distance between two tunnels is only 3 meters. That technology is very, very difficult. And also we can construct a very long tunnels for high-speed trains. And we also have technologies to build very long bridges with the speed of 300 kilometers and longer more than 9 kilometers on Yangtze River. Our government set very scientific plannings. For example, in the next 5 years, we will construct 4 vertical, 10 vertical and 10 horizontal transportation corridors from north to south and from east to west. We have extended the high-speed railway networks to 30,000 kilometers, which is about doubles of the rest of the countries in the world.
It's definitely a pleasure to be able to say a few words as to how we are looking at connectivity from Bangladesh's point of view. In China, there is a saying that a rising tide raises all the boats. And as a close neighboring country, of course, we have been trying to see how we can leverage or tap into the phenomenal Chinese economic rise and try to use that to our advantage to promote our own economic growth and structural transformation. So just to wrap up how we see, again, Bangladesh faring, I mean, we, of course, consider the whole issue of connectivity as a strategic opportunity, and we believe that it gives us a win-win opportunity, and we should not kind of be held hostage to some zero-sum geographical games that had actually frustrated some of these linkages and initiatives so far. And of course, diplomatically, it's critical for us that we try to navigate through our relations with these different countries to get the maximum benefit for the development of our people.
So, for One Belt One Road, what's the meaning and what's the target for One Belt One Road? I think the first is to find to make a bigger market. You know, I just mentioned the economic growth in the past 30 years is very fast. And we have accumulated a huge capacity of industrial productions and maybe the capacity to build and construction. Chinese always are experts on construction. So a bigger market is very important to China and to the whole world. And the second target, I think, is to make a good neighborhood, a better environment for China to have more growth. So, in this background, and I think the One Belt One Road is not only the affairs of China; it's an important affair to the whole world because this initiative connected China with nearly all of the countries in the world, especially in the Euro-Asia continent.
Now, earlier today, one of the speakers had said that, it would be nice if Trump would pay attention to joining the BRICS. And many of us amongst ourselves said, Trump must do this. And so I have a question for the audience. When are we, the people, going to demand our public servants do what the people and what the globe need to get done? That's my question.
I'll try to, in the few minutes that we have left, answer some of the questions for which this conference was originally called and which came up in the discussion between Helga and Patrick Ho, which is the misconceptions about Western thought in China and misconceptions about Confucianism in the West. And in particular, something that I did, in fact, do a great deal of study on while I was on my sabbatical leave, which is precisely that it was the British who, when they semi-colonized China, set about, as they do in all of their colonies, to profile the philosophies and cultures of these nations and pick out those backward-tending tendencies in those cultures, like the caste system in India, and define that as the nature of the colony in order to keep them backwards and to maintain colonial power over a divided and backward nation. And this is what happened in spades in China, and it's still very, very much alive today. The traditions of Russell and Dewey, the traditions of Yen Fu, the traditions of Needham are still very strong in China. This is what Xi Jinping is working against. This is what he had to root out and still has to root out. These are fundamental issues which are being fought out there. Luckily in China, the humanists are winning. We have to link with that tradition in China, just as we have to link with our best traditions in the West in order to really realize this kind of a renaissance which we have to bring about. And to do that, the evil of the British system indeed must be crushed. We have to. We won't survive if we don't. So we need to know the tremendously inspiring presentation that Helga gave this morning. This is the basis on which we can move ourselves to the mission that we do have as a human race, but we have to recognize that we have to crush this British system if we're going to make it work.
And why should it not be conceivable that mankind becomes adult, so that we cease to attack each other like uneducated 4-year-olds, or to express it otherwise, to arrest the development of humanity in senseless geopolitical conflicts. Why should it not be within our immediate grasp to eliminate poverty from this world, to make possible universal education for all children, with that making the beautiful soul the goal of education, as Wilhelm von Humboldt did, but also Confucius? The most crucial question for Confucius and Schiller was educating love of mankind, which Confucius valued higher than life itself, more important than fire and water, and which Schiller called the most beautiful phenomena in the soul-filled creation, the omnipotent magnet in the spiritual world, the source of devotion and the most sublime virtue, where man becomes richer with everything he loves. For Confucius, the love of mankind was the highest morality, making possible all other ethical values, as in the Lun Yu, where Confucius says, all deeds of man must be embodied in it, otherwise they are worthless. To this belongs also that man must have compassion for the other. For Lessing, the most compassionate human being was also the best, as he is ready to act on the foundation of all civil virtues and demonstrates all manners of generosity. It is told that Confucius, that he never satisfied his hunger when eating next to a man in mourning, as he did not want to enjoy his meal when another one suffered. Likewise, in the Lun Yu, Confucius emphasizes how important it is for a state to continuously cultivate in its citizens for love of mankind. Otherwise, it is doomed. Confucius said, to lead a people lacking education into war is to guarantee their doom. The analogy for the present is obvious and requires no comment. For both Confucius and Schiller, cultivation of the individual and society by means of aesthetical education, whereby art, which itself must attain the highest standard, plays the most important role. Schiller demanded from the poets as from the artists generally to elevate themselves to the highest moral and aesthetical height before he practices his art. The task of ennobling that personality to the highest degree, of refining it into the purest, most splendid humanity, is the first and most important business he must address before he may venture to steer or to move his audience. There can be no greater value to this, to his poetry, than that it is a perfected imprint of a truly interesting disposition, of a truly interesting, perfected mind. In his poem, The Artist, Schiller assigns the artists the responsibility for civilization. The dignity of man into your hands is given, its keeper be. It sinks with you it will be risen. The same idea is found in Confucius, in particular regarding music. He says, music rises from the heart. When the emotions are touched, they are expressed in sound, and when the sounds take definite forms, we have music. Therefore, the music of a peaceful and prosperous country is quiet and joyous, and the government is orderly. The music of a country in turmoil shows dissatisfaction and anger, and the government is chaotic. The music of a destroyed country shows sorrow and remembrance of the past, and the people are distressed. When we see music and government, thus we see music and government are directly connected to one another.